check spring is located on your front rotary tension. I believe that this rotary tension is only here for one reason, and that's to put tension or provide a check spring. The check spring is very important also in making your stitch, in that when your take-up lever is pulling the thread up out of the bottom of the quilt, it has a limited amount of travel. It can only travel up as high as its highest stroke. If it hasn't pulled all of the thread out from the bottom of the quilt at that point, if we didn't have some other device to check that, we would end up with extra top thread loops on the back of our quilt. Check spring is what takes care of that. You see, this is just normal operation, and you can see that as this lever would go all the way up, that this device can pull a little more thread out from the bottom of the quilt. That's exactly what it's for. If you've ever had any of those little, what we call quilt boogies, those little extra twisted thread on the bottom of your quilt, this could very likely be the culprit. These can break, they can be weak, they can be out of adjustment. When they're in right, you'll see that the loop here, that the thread actually goes over, is located right between the two posts. Your manual will tell you set it at 1030. You'll also want to make sure that it's not in too far, and that the side of this is rubbing on the side of this black collar here. Both of those can be adjusted or fixed by loosening the set screw that's on the side of the collar right here where my finger is at about 4 o'clock. It's a 1/16 inch, and if I loosen that, I can take this, pull it out, push it in, rotate it to get that spring right where I want it. Again, the loop at 1030, and make sure that it's not pushed in so far that it rubs on the side of the spring. Keep it pulled out just a little. The other thing is, with this check spring, we can increase the amount of tension on this spring. Right now it's very light and would work for most cotton muslins. Sometimes it's not enough though to pull that thread out of a thickly woven fabric like some petites. To increase the tension on this check spring and helping this spring to pull that extra thread up from the bottom, we could simply insert a screwdriver at the end of this shaft, and if I turn it clockwise about a quarter turn, you'll notice a substantial increase in the amount of tension that's on that spring now. And this again will help pull that thread up. But be aware, if you get it too tight, then the spring won't react at all. It won't pull down. It'll stay up, and it will just not be effective whatsoever. So it can get too tight. The recommended settings, I would say, would be, and of course this is not really easy to explain. It's very subjective, I guess. But you should have a light pressure on that spring. And the only time I would increase it a little more is when I'm noticing on a quilt that I'm having some of those little quilt boogies. I might come in and give it a little bit, maybe 10 minutes, turn, a little more, give it a try. But again, I would want to turn it back to where it was so that it works more effectively on those thinly woven fabrics and those cottons and muslins that we generally use. I'm going to show you now how to replace this check spring once it breaks. Okay, here we are with our front rotary tensioning device with our built-in check spring assembly. Now this spring is not broke, but I want to show you how we would replace a broken spring, so use your imagination here. Once this assembly is out of the machine, we don't have to take the front part of this apart. We don't have to remove the knob or anything like that to change this check spring. We simply have to loosen the little screw on the side of this barrel. If I loosen that, then this tensioning part of this device can be separated and set to the side, and now I can take the old spring out of the barrel. However, if it's broke, it'll just fall out. Once I take the spring out, I always clean parts before I reassemble them. Again, the check spring is a good spare part to have. They will break it in an opportune time. To replace this now, we're simply going to work the arm through the slot in the side of the barrel. Can only go one way. And then we're going to push the spring in with the bottom of the spring going into the bottom of the barrel. And now the spring is installed in the barrel. Now what we want to do is take the tensioning part, and you'll see that there's a little slot right here in the side of this shaft. And what's going to happen is when I put it inside here, part of that spring is poking up that way, and it's going to lodge, or it's going to get caught in there, and that's what we want. And the way that we do that is we'll simply push this in and then turn it until it slides in. That means the springs went inside there. I'll do it once more. Just turn it, there it goes. Now it fell in. And this is what you should get. Now, what you want to do at this point in your manual will tell you is you want to turn that spring arm till where it's at the top of that rectangular slot, and then the manual says turn it 1/10 of a turn past. Just a little bit. Doesn't take much. Just turn a little bit, and you'll notice if you hold this together like I'm doing here that you can operate that spring, and you should have a certain amount of resistance. Again, it's not real taut. As I said, the manual says 1/10 of a turn is proper setting for that. Once you have it turned up and you've gone past that 1/10, you feel that you have the resistance there, you're going to tighten up this barrel, or this screw in the side of this barrel, like that. Now your assembly is actually ready to put back into the machine. We feel we have the tension there, and you can see that, as I showed earlier, that if we put our screwdriver in this slot at the end of the knob, that we can turn this one way or the other. Of course, it's harder to do it when it's not in the machine, but what that's doing is turning that slot, or turning that shaft, which makes this increase in tension. If we turn it tighter, or if we turn it looser, it has less tension. Now we're going to install this back into the machine. Okay, now we're going to install this Checkspring assembly, rotary tension assembly, back into the machine. I'm going to push this in, but I'm going to make sure that I keep this side clear of that black collar, and I'm going to make sure that this loop is between these two posts, or at 1030. And then I'm simply going to tighten up the set screw that is here at 4 o'clock on the side of this black collar. And now I have my check spring replaced. If I need to increase the tension again on that check spring, if it's a little too weak, I notice that I'm getting some loops on the bottom of my quilt, I would come with the screwdriver and tighten that up just a tad. Always double check your work, make sure that that's clear and it's positioned properly.